Hello, I was about to say good afternoon, good morning. It depends where you are. It's good afternoon for me on the East Coast in New Jersey. I am Ryan Hammer, your weekly host of the BR Weekly College Basketball AP Poll Show. I feel like most of us are kind of here. We come back every week. I love you all. If you're new to this, we go over the new college basketball AP poll every single Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time or 101, 102, depending on if they drop the poll a little late, you know what I'm saying? So here we are, new top 25, a lot of movement, even at the top, actually, all over the place, teams going in and out of the top 25. It was an absolutely hectic week in college basketball, like it always is, but we are past the holidays officially. Students are back on campuses all around the country now, starting today for the most part, I think, for majority of schools. But we're in conference play. Every single team in the country is playing in conference games. So we're at a good point right now to feel good about the true bulk of the season in college basketball, and that's why we have all this movement and all these crazy games. It's good to see you guys in the comments. I see that. You know what I say at the beginning of every show. Make sure to stay active in the comments, active in the chat, ask questions, give your thoughts on teams. Stay tuned for polls also throughout the show because it's going to be a good one. Let's start at the top. Should we talk about Michigan first? Let's talk about Arizona first because they're number one. They've been number one basically the entire season for the most part since they got there. Let's go Arizona first, and then we'll get to Michigan eventually. We will get there. Arizona, number one in the country, one of the five total undefeated teams left. We have Arizona, Iowa State. See if I can do this. Nebraska, Vandy, Miami, University of Ohio. Arizona right now, 16-0. They're second in the net. They're the only top five team in the country that's top five in offensive and defensive efficiency on KenPom, and probably really on basically every single analytical site. They've been balanced, offensive rebounding the hell out of the ball. Braden Burries has popped off and broken out like crazy. So now they have really, not to be whatever. They have like seven guys realistically who have been unbelievable. They have a trusty 7-8 man rotation that's been awesome. I think they've been flying under the radar a little bit, Arizona, because they play late on the West Coast, so West Coast teams that are good always fly under the radar. But they also haven't played good teams it's just kind of like how the cookie crumbles for who they're playing in their Big 12 schedule, right? So like they played like crazy start to their season. They played Florida, UCLA, UConn, Auburn, Alabama, San Diego State. Obviously beat the crap out of all of them, and then they played this is right before Christmas. Bethune-Cookman, South Dakota State, and then Utah, Kansas State, TCU to start Big 12 play. That's like probably the easiest you could possibly get to start the conference play. So, because they're not playing great teams, because they're playing late in the night, people aren't paying attention to Arizona. They are for sure the best team in the country as of right now. They're going to play ASU, UCF, who's been good, Cincy, West Virginia in the next 2 weeks. So you might have another 2 weeks of flying under the radar for Arizona because they don't get BYU until January 26th on a Monday night at BYU. After a short turnaround of playing Saturday also, which is interesting. But they don't play any of BYU, even Kansas, Texas Tech, Houston, Iowa State until that BYU game. And then they play Houston, Texas Tech, and Iowa State only once all year long. And they don't play Iowa State until Monday, March 2nd. That's going to be the only time they play them. So I think that's why Arizona's flying under the radar. They're obviously the best team in the country. You definitely got to pay attention to them more a little bit. So definitely deserving of that spot. Michigan, Arizona were splitting votes last week, but now obviously the Michigan loss. We go to just Arizona getting all the votes except for one, who Iowa State on to the next undefeated team, because I think the undefeated teams are good to talk about this week. 16-0. 61 voters on the AP poll. 60 of them had Arizona at number one. One of them had Iowa State at number one. I don't know who it was. I don't like. I think you have to put Arizona at number one right now if you're doing a power rankings. You have an AP ballot, but I understand the case for, hey, Iowa State's the best team in the country. They remind me a lot of 2021 Baylor with the way their team's built, with the way their coaching staff is built, the way they play defense with no middle, their strengths and weaknesses as a team with turnover margin and really good shooting and experienced guys and good guard play. They remind me a lot of that 2021 Baylor team that cakewalked to a national championship. But Iowa State at number two, they're 16-0, third in the net right now. They are third in KenPom, but not by a lot. Really, Michigan, Arizona, and Iowa State in KenPom are the three best teams in the country with a good margin on everybody else. They haven't played the greatest teams lately either, ever since the Purdue dominant win. They were great in players era. People said, okay, Iowa State's awesome. Then they dominate Purdue in Mackey, and everyone's like, oh my God, Iowa State's the best team ever. They play Iowa after that in a tight one. Then they played some mid-majors, West Virginia, Baylor, Oklahoma State to start Big 12 play. So similar to Arizona, probably a little bit better of a schedule than Arizona played, but similar in the sense that they haven't been playing great teams in the beginning of Big 12 play. So people have kind of forgotten about Iowa State a little bit. They're going to play Kansas on the road this week, who desperately needs a win. Cincy, UCF, Oklahoma State, Colorado, Kansas State, Baylor, TCU, Kansas. Again, there is a chance that they could go undefeated through that stretch, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games. Right now, they're 16-0. Like, if Iowa State was 25-0 going into that game, hosting Houston on Monday night, February 16th, that would be one of the most anticipated games in the entire country, in the entire season, which would be awesome. I don't think that Arizona and Iowa State are both going to get to be undefeated all the way to a point where they play on March 2nd. It would be absolutely insane, but you never know. These two teams have been unbelievable. They've been beating everybody in conference play, and they've been beating everybody in the country, so maybe we get that. I do wish they played a little bit earlier in the year. UConn has been great, but I really want to talk about Michigan because they were the other undefeated team also. Michigan obviously went down to, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank, Wisconsin, which I'm shocked that they didn't get more votes and they weren't in the top 25, maybe 26 or 27. But Michigan goes down, and then we'll get to chat in a second. We'll get to some comments after we talk about Michigan because it's obviously the biggest storyline of the week. Michigan looks like the most dominant team ever for a majority of the season. Then they almost lose at Penn State, where Penn State had game on the line, one last possession. Freddie DeLeon, they came out of a timeout, and all they drew up was, let's ISO Yaxel Lendenborg, one of the best defenders in the country, and let's just chuck up a shot. Didn't work out for Penn State. So Michigan survived at Penn State, and then they did not survive when they came back home in Ann Arbor and lost to Wisconsin, a team that was red hot shooting the ball, that can shoot the ball, obviously, with the kind of guys they have, but Wisconsin also limited what Michigan could do entry ball wise and doubling in the post, so the balls coming inside were not easy, and they were hitting their threes, so they forced Michigan to have to go late into the shot clock, have to take outside shots to keep up with Wisconsin, and it ended up not working out. Shout out to Wisconsin with a big win. That's going to probably be a win that gets them into the NCAA tournament versus what might not, if depending on how the rest of the season goes. But Michigan, I'm not overly worried about them. I have them at number 3 in my power rankings. Them at 4, if you have them at 5, behind Purdue, whatever. Like, they're top 5. I'm not overly worried about Michigan because when they're at their best, they will beat anybody and everybody. I still think that's true. And this is a great poll. Should Michigan be in the top 5? 100% they're still legit. People think that because they lost to Wisconsin, they should be dropped out of the top 5. I think that's a little drastic because let's look at the grand scale of the season, right? Michigan starts the year off. They played, I think it was Oakland, TCU, and Wake Forest. TCU and Wake Forest games, they did not look good. They were very, very, very tight wins. Wake was in overtime. TCU, they barely skated by that game. They were turning the ball over at alarming rates. They did not look dominant like you wanted them to be coming into the year. They were still 3-0. They skated by. And then for 10 games in a row, including players error, like beating Gonzaga by 40, Auburn by 40, they beat San Diego State by 30. They, for 10 games in a row after the first 3 games that were a struggle, they dominate everybody by 30 plus. Every single team they played, I think 18 was the closest they had a game, but realistically, every game they clean through, dominate. Then all of a sudden they come to 2 games in a row this week, Penn State and Wisconsin, that they struggle in. The reason why it's alarming for Michigan is because they're clearly going through these very hot and very cold streaks, and that worries me for not what is the real Michigan, because that is the real Michigan, and at their peak, they're amazing. It's what Michigan do we get in March? What Michigan do we get in the big games? Are they going to have a cold stretch where they slip up and they lose to an 8 or 9 seed if they're a 1 seed in the second round of the tournament? Like, that's my worry for Michigan, and the fact that not necessarily teams will have figured out the style to beat them and replicate what Wisconsin did, because I felt like Michigan was rattled and they were almost in their own head and beating themselves at the end of that game and kind of at that point. So it's very interesting to talk about Michigan. I think most people will be very polarizing on one side or the other, where you say, oh no, Michigan's fine. Like, they went from number 1 down to number 1 in KenPom and analytical sites because they've been so dominant. And then other people will say, well, they lost to Wisconsin and they should have lost to Penn State or almost lost to Penn State. And then you take back the Wake Forest and the TCU game from earlier in the year, like 4 games that they've struggled in back-to-back and back-to-back. I hate that. I'd rather them struggle in one game and then pick it up the next game and then struggle 3 weeks later and then pick it up after that. Like, the streakiness is what I hate about teams and relying on them in the NCAA tournament, because the way March is set up, the way the postseason bracket and postseason play is set up in college basketball, that is alarming. And I do not enjoy that. Again, not overly worried. I think 3, 4, 5 is probably where they should be here. So at 4, I have no problem with that at all. Let's get to some of the chat real fast before we go on. Cash Duke said Duke beats 2 top 25 and doesn't bounce up. Michigan down only 1. Michigan went down 2. They were number 2 last week. Iowa State was 3. UConn was 4. And I don't think Duke deserves to go up. What is the case? See, here's the thing. First of all, Louisville has not been good. I saw someone in the chat say something about Louisville also. Kirchhoff says, how is Louisville still ranked after losing both games? Yeah, and I think it's a good conversation to have about Michigan, about Duke and Louisville. Louisville probably should have dipped below 20 for sure, because they didn't almost lose to BC, but they were not looking good in that game either. Duke, like, sure, you could say they beat 2 good teams, they deserve to go up, but who do they deserve to go up against, up above? Like Michigan loses 1 game after beating Gonzaga and teams by 40 all year. Why should they drop from 2 to 6 and Duke should go up by beating a team that they should beat twice, right? Like SMU and Louisville, I think it was. So I don't think Duke deserves to go up. I think if anything, you can argue that Houston and Nebraska should be above them, maybe even Vanderbilt. But I think 6 is fine, 7, 8, that's probably the right spot for Duke, so I have no problem with that. Why is BYU 11? That is because the voters felt they've seen enough with Vandy beating Alabama, and obviously Nebraska, so they wanted to put them above BYU. I think BYU was 10 last week. They might have been 9, but I think they were 10 last week, and Nebraska was 9, if I'm correct. But I think they were 10. They went down 1 spot because the voters wanted to make room for Vandy. It's not the end of the world. It's just really not the end of the world for that. Why the hell is Houston ranked so low from Snow D514? Talked about them before a little bit. I think we touched on them, but again, why should they go up? Because they have the loss against Tennessee. They've had a couple of games. They haven't looked great. They had a great win over Texas Tech, who I think is also an underrated team. It's okay if you don't move up when you think you deserve to just because you're winning games. Like, teams have to lose and teams have to have a reason to fall also on top of you going up. But I think Houston is definitely one of the more underrated top teams. We know Houston. We know how good they are in March every year. We know how good the system is. Their freshmen, Kingston Flemings and Chris Snack, are getting better and better. The Big 12 is the best conference in the country. It's got the best top 4 maybe ever between Arizona, Iowa State, Houston, and BYU. So I wouldn't worry about them. It kind of just is what it is. Auburn not receiving any votes is actually insane, and then we'll get back to some of the teams here. I wouldn't have voted for Auburn in the top 25. I wouldn't even put them in my top 30 because sure, they beat Arkansas by 22, but they also lost this week at home against Texas A&M. Like, I know they almost won the buzzer beater, Keyshawn Murphy, and was very close, but you can't just say, oh, they beat Arkansas, who's a good team and ranked, so therefore Auburn has to go in. Like, look at the entire resume of their season. They've lost to a lot of really good teams, but Auburn hasn't been like resoundingly great. I expect them to get a few votes, maybe over a St. Mary's and teams like that. But again, Texas A&M is getting votes because Texas A&M beat Auburn, right? Texas A&M beat Auburn, and they beat Oklahoma this week. They have a better record. They haven't played as good of a schedule, so I would put Auburn. I still would vote for Auburn over Texas A&M in the wide scope of things, but Texas A&M just walked into Auburn and Neville and beat them, so how can you vote for Auburn over Texas A&M? I think is the case there, what people are kind of saying. So let's go on to a couple of other teams. Nebraska ball. Let's do the undefeated teams. Nebraska ball at number 8. Almost lost at Indiana. Are they at Indiana? Yeah, they're at Indiana. They got by with that win. They were really getting their ass kicked for a lot of that game, and Indiana has the recipe to beat them. The recipe to beat Nebraska. I think we talked about it last week, but I've talked a lot about on my podcast and platforms and videos. Nebraska plays an amazing style, very analytical heavy. They play a no middle defense that basically forces teams to shoot threes on them. If I had a clipboard, I would show you what they do. They essentially push the ball to the sidelines and use the sideline as an extra defender because they obviously can't go there. Push the ball to the sideline, force teams to go to the corner, trap the ball in the corner, converge on the post, converge inside when you need to make them kick out and have to take threes. And then when they kick it out and try to shoot threes, you can test the best you can and you kind of live with that. It's been working very, very well. This is what 2021 Baylor won a national championship with. This is what Texas Tech went to the Final Four in, 18 or 19 with Chris Beard and Mark Adams on staff. They ran it there. Teams run it now. Iowa State, who TJ Otzelberger was an assistant under the Nebraska coach Fred Hoiberg at Iowa State. So they kind of take it from each other a little bit. It's very successful if you do it well, but Indiana had the right idea to beat them. Indiana's a great shooting team. They have a ton of really good shooters on their team, really good spacing. So they tried to do that. A lot of dribble drives, a lot of dribble driving kicks, take shots when you find them, take them early, take them with confidence. Indiana was shooting the lights out. They did a very, very good job at that. They had that game for a little while, but give Nebraska ball credit. Nebraska ball credit because they fought back hard. They were resilient. Jamarcus Lawrence was great in that game, and they proved they were the better team. Wins like this are what prove Nebraska is legit to me because I think if Indiana can shoot the lights out and be like, oh, look, we just beat Nebraska by just doing that, then it's alarming. And it's easily the recipe for success against them. But the fact that they were able to fight back and win is awesome. Which undefeated team is a legit contender is a great poll. Nebraska, Vandy, both of them, neither. They're both frauds, which is leading the way. See, legit contender, I wouldn't call them both frauds necessarily, but I think as a legit title contender, I would say that no, they're probably not either real national title contenders because Vandy hasn't played a good enough schedule. Nebraska didn't play a good enough schedule in the non-con to prove it to me against non-Big Ten teams because the way that they play defense, forcing teams to have to shoot a lot, is because they are in the Big Ten. If they were in the SEC, they would probably not be playing this style and they would never be prioritizing letting teams shoot a lot of threes of high volume because SEC teams can shoot the lights out and they got shooters and they're willing to do it and they're willing to score at high rates. So the fact that they're in the Big Ten and they didn't do it versus great teams in the non-con, that's the only thing that holds me back from saying that Nebraska can win the national championship. Vandy hasn't played a great schedule. The SEC is actually not as great and top heavy as you want it to be for national title contenders. And their athleticism and length, I think, at the top end will be a problem. If they have to play in Iowa State and Arizona, even a Houston defensively, a Duke, Michigan, UConn, like those teams, I think should be able to beat them because of that. But obviously, we'll see if we ever get those matchups. Vandy's a good one, though. 16-0. They're up to number 10 in the country. I just kind of gave you the spiel about them. This is a big week for them, or a big week and a half. They play Texas, and then they host Florida, and then they get Arkansas in the next 3 games. Texas, who just won at Alabama and has been decent, but Florida and Arkansas are the two tests because those are two teams that very much can exploit the weakness of Vanderbilt, which is length and athleticism, especially Florida. And realistically, even the talented scorers on Arkansas are all athletic, are all really talented. So this is going to be the big test for Vandy. If they go 3-0, beat Texas, beat Florida, beat Arkansas, excuse me, they're going to be in top 4 or 5 conversations. Me personally, if they win all 3 of those games, how do you not could say, okay, they're legit, they're a national title contender? That would prove that to me 100%. If they can beat all 3 of these teams and without anything crazy happening, obviously, and looking ridiculous. But Vandy, number 10 right now, firmly on their path to being great and winning the SEC. The game against Florida right now looks like the 2 best contenders and maybe even the 3 with Arkansas. So that will be interesting. Couple comments we got here. P. Donovan, I love this one. P. Donovan 6, keep an eye out for Murray State. I love Murray State. I did a whole segment on my podcast this morning about them, and I'll do more stuff on them this week. They're in the MVC. No votes because they don't deserve to, but they're definitely a mid-major to watch out for. How is Forrest Dolphin? How is Wisconsin still not there? They just beat Michigan. They're getting votes. They are 26, 27, 28, 29, 30th in the AP poll if you go by rankings like that. I'm okay with them being 30. I get it. It's a full season picture. You can't just say, okay, they beat one good team, but you can't throw out the door that they've also lost a couple of bad games too, and they also looked really bad then. So it's a give and take. I probably would have voted for them over Seton Hall. I probably would have voted for St. Louis over both of them, to be completely honest with you, but I agree. I thought Wisconsin would get more votes because the AP voters take that into consideration more than normal. Izzy said, keep sleeping on them Hurricanes. Miami's been good. They really haven't played good enough teams to consider them like legit and vote for them. I think they're 36 in KenPom. They are 14-2 overall. They lost to Florida and BYU, which I remember both were like, they didn't look amazing. They didn't look terrible in those games. The teams that they have beaten, Georgetown, Ole Miss, Pitt, Wake, and Georgia Tech is nowhere near good enough to give them top 25 votes. I'm surprised they're getting this many votes at all for beating those teams. I think that's just because their name is Miami. Their losses are fine against good teams, and they have a really good record on paper. So I don't think they deserve to be there yet. I somewhat disagree with that comment. We talked about BYU. Lightning Warrior asked about them dropping 2 a little bit. And then Anthony says, why did Gonzaga drop when they haven't lost since Thanksgiving and Nebraska has had closer games? This is the story about the teams that play in a team that plays in the WCC in a non-power conference, right? They get knocked for not playing good teams week after week because when Nebraska goes and beats better teams overall, realistically, even if Indiana is better than all the WCC teams outside of Gonzaga, maybe St. Mary's. Um, could Seattle, could Santa Clara beat them? San Francisco, sure, but in the grand scheme of things, Indiana would be one of the best teams in the WCC. So it's a good example of okay, like Vandy, for example. If Vandy and Gonzaga go undefeated this week, both of them. Gonzaga plays Seattle and I forget who else. Vandy plays Texas and Florida. Vandy is going to jump them in the AP poll next week because they beat Florida and Gonzaga beat teams that they're really supposed to manhandle and beat pretty easily. So it kind of just is what it is with Gonzaga. The glory about it is that teams will lose above them, right? UConn, Michigan, Purdue, Duke, Houston, Nebraska, Vandy, like these teams will lose more games because they're playing really tough schedules in power conferences. And Gonzaga might not lose a game the rest of the year. They might have the one loss versus Michigan by 40 in players era, and that's it when they go into the postseason play in WCC tournament. So Gonzaga, I wouldn't be worried. Let things kind of play out as they will, right? Let Nebraska jump them when they're undefeated. They're not going to be undefeated all year. Let Vandy jump them if they're undefeated after this week. Like, let it happen because Houston will lose at some point. Nebraska and Vandy will lose at some point. Purdue and Duke will lose again at some point. And Gonzaga will still be there unless they start choking, obviously, games that they really should be winning. But the point is that Gonzaga always goes through this. They always get underrated for the most part, in my opinion, because of where they play. They're one of the best teams in the country. I think they're a legit national title contender. So, Booty Daddy says Illinois, great wire-to-wire road win yesterday at Carver. Definitely a good win. They almost choked it away. Iowa fought hard, but that's a team that Illinois should be beating most of the time. Iowa dropped out of the top 25 into 27. Singing Obsidian says UVA is a sleeper. Love this shout. UVA up to 16. I'm surprised the AP voters are giving them the credit that they deserve because I called Virginia a dark horse, not national, dark horse ACC title contender in the offseason, and I've been saying it all year. They're 15th in KenPom. They're 14-2. They have the one loss to Butler in November, which isn't great, and then they lost against Virginia Tech on the road in their first game without Jakari White in triple overtime in a crazy game. So Virginia's resume is good. They've beaten Texas, they've beaten Dayton, they've beaten NC State, Maryland, Stanford, Cal. They haven't beaten the great teams yet. They're playing Louisville this week, tomorrow night at Louisville on the road, which is an awesome game. I like Virginia a lot. Hopefully they get Jakari White back soon. I don't think he's going to play this week. They get Louisville, SMU on the road, and then Carolina next week at home. These next three games are huge for Virginia. I mean, if you win all three, you prove it, and you're probably getting consideration in the top 10 because these are three teams who have been in and out, and I think three teams who are ranked in the top 25, or at least SMU just got bounced out. So top 30 teams. But big week for Virginia. I love the way they play. I love Ryan Odom. I love this shout. Great, 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 great point. Big Ben's Arizona not hiding from anyone. UConn doesn't want to see us again. Well, UConn does want to see Arizona again with Terrace Reed playing and Braylon Mullins fully locked in now. But it was a win for Arizona because they're the better team in that. I agree. Speaking of Arizona, TD 2288. Braden Burridge is playing like a top 5 freshman. Absolutely. I cannot believe that it took like 2 weeks for him to just kick up and become their best player all of a sudden. Like him and Koa Pete have kind of gone back and forth of being the best freshman and best player on the team. Jaden Bradley, obviously. Krivos, Toby Awaka, Anthony DeLorso. Like Arizona is loaded with dudes for absolute certainty. A couple other teams real fast I want to talk to you before we hop out of here. Florida is a team to definitely talk about. I mentioned them with the Vandy schedule and in the SEC. 19th in the country. They got knocked out of the top 25 last week after a bad week. 11-5. All 5 of their losses are 1 or 2 possessions away, even against Arizona to start the season. Florida had a great week. They beat Georgia. They beat Tennessee, 2 top 25 ranked teams, still both ranked in the top 25. The guard play was great. Boogie Flan cut his hair, had 23 points. Xavier and Herb Klavchar were better. Ruben Chinyulu had near 20 and 20. Tommy Houck and Alex Condon didn't even play amazing because they didn't have to against Tennessee. I was down in Gainesville for that game and all week spending time with them. This is a team that's figuring things out very, very well, and I still think is a little underrated. I don't know if they're like back to what they were last year, if we can win the national championship, because now we have Walter Clayton back like we wanted to with Boogie Flan. I don't think it's like anything crazy like that, but I think they're a team that can easily win the SEC, and we're going to learn a lot about both them and Vandy this week when they play each other. And then the last team I want to touch on is Utah State. at 23. It's about damn time that the voters are giving Utah State the credit they deserve. The Mountain West is not great outside of Utah State, but it's not awful. They have a really good depth of about five or six other teams who are good and can get into the tournament, but would probably only get one or two of them. And then you have Utah State, who's 14-1, who's beaten the absolute crap out of everybody in the conference on the road at Boise State. They beat Colorado State by 42, who's a good team. They are underlooked because of the Mountain West, but this is the best team in program history. This is the best Utah State team that they have ever had. I think they're 20th in KenPom right now, which is the highest they've ever been, tied for back in 2023 in March. They're going to play Nevada, who's good this week, and GCU on the road, which is always tough to win at. This would be a big test for them also because if they get through 2 wins this week, they could run the table in the Mountain West, which would be absolutely incredible to see. So shout out to Utah State. You definitely got to look out for them. They are a team not to be reckoned with. Let's do a couple more questions before we hop out of here. Jack Wright, what is UGA's ceiling? Georgia, I don't love Georgia's ceiling in the tournament. I think the way they play is friendly for being an upset team because they play so fast and so crazy and just push the ball and transition so much. I think their ceiling is like Sweet 16 and maybe even round of 32 because I just don't buy that they're going to get a good enough seed outside of like an 8 or 9, maybe a 7 to be able to be in a good spot to not have to play elite teams from the start. So I'll say Sweet 16, the ceiling, maybe even round of 32. Roaring Hunter, Nova needs to be top 25 here very soon. It's tough at the end. Like, look at the back end of the number of votes real fast. I'll pull it up for you guys. Seton Hall is at 136 votes, and then St. Louis actually is a pretty big gap, but then 92, 60, 58, 40. The margins are relatively thin when you think about it. I wouldn't be worried if I'm Villanova because all you have to worry about is getting into the tournament and beating the teams that are around you, right? St. John's and Seton Hall are the big ones, and even Creighton with Villanova in the middle, like after UConn in the Big East. So focus on winning those games like they did against Seton Hall. Obviously, you can't lose games to Marquette, which they almost did. The Creighton game, like you really don't want to lose to Creighton either. But I just wouldn't worry about Villanova. I don't think they deserve to be in the top 25, so I'm okay with them not being here. I have a small disagreement there. And then Trevor Bucky will go last one here. Thoughts on UCF? I think UCF is solid. By the way, look at that. Good question. I think UCF is solid. I think they're fun. I don't think that they're amazing. It's tough. They're a really, really tricky team because like they beat Kansas, then they lose to Oklahoma State, who's not bad. Then they beat Cincinnati. I think they're a bubble team is what I think about them. I think they're solid. I don't think that they're crazy dangerous for a crazy tournament run or anything like that. But if they can keep proving themselves in the Big 12, and their only losses are the Oklahoma State loss and the Vandy loss from early in the year, which obviously looks very okay and very good now. They haven't played a great schedule yet. They've beaten Texas A&M, Pitt, FAU, Kansas, Cincinnati. So when they play against the Arizona, the Iowa State, even like Colorado, Texas Tech, West Virginia later in the year, and BYU and like we're going to learn a lot more about them as the season goes on, but they're fun. I like that they're good. Friend of the program, obviously, with the jersey behind me here. So shout out to UCF. That is going to cut it for us this week, I think. Crazy week in college basketball. You have another insane slate. I did my math. There's about 50 plus good games to watch this entire week. All week, we're in the thick of it, and before you know it, it's going to be late February, and then all of a sudden it's going to be March, and you're looking at brackets, baby. So appreciate y'all for being here as always. We'll be back here next Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, or like I said, 101 or 102 Eastern time when the AP poll drops to break it down again. Appreciate y'all for being here again. Have a great week, all right?